Now, there are calls for the law on leasehold properties to be simplified to prevent homeowners paying over the odds when they have to renew their lease. Lawyers say some landlords are actually benefiting from the fact that many people don't understand the system. There are just over 1.5 million leasehold flats and houses in England and Wales, with around 3 million residents.
We could have gone and bought the freehold.
Brian Barnett is not happy. The lease on his flat is about to fall below 80 years. Initially, his freeholder wanted £5,700 to extend it by a further 90 years. Now that's been negotiated to a lower price after they brought in an independent valuer. But neither side has agreed on a final price, and they're still talking.
The current deal on the table is that he gets £4,700 for the premium. He wants us to carry on paying the ground rent, which is currently £100 a year, but that's due to go up to £200 a year and then £400 a year, and so he still wants that. But I think the worst bit is he's asking £1,000 per property for his legal fees. You just feel they're trying to squeeze more out of it than they should.
Brian's freeholder is doing nothing wrong. They are perfectly within their rights to ask for any amount they think is reasonable, but views can differ on what a reasonable amount is. There are just over 1.5 million leasehold flats and houses in England and Wales, with around 3 million residents. But you may be surprised to learn that they never actually fully technically own the property, because the land is owned by the freeholder. And that freeholder is perfectly entitled to ask for cash if the lease falls below 80 years. The problem is, when that happens, many leaseholders feel that they are being asked to pay too much.
I'm sympathetic with that view that it would appear unfair, but that is the law, that is the leasehold system, and one has got to follow the due process of law.
Lord Newburger, the second most senior judge in England and Wales, said recently he believes the law in this area has to change. And lawyers are of a similar mind. Some have seen cases where the leaseholder has been asked for double or more than the amount recommended by an independent valuer.
Some landlords are using the complexity of the legislation and the innocence and gullibility of flat owners to their own advantage, and I am anxious that flat owners should understand what their rights are.
The question is, what can you do if you feel you're being asked to pay too much? Some leaseholders do fight it through a legally binding tribunal, but this process itself can be costly. Experts say the first step is to go online, where a government-funded advice site can give you an estimate on what you should be paying based on the value of your home, the ground rent you're currently paying, and the date the lease originally started.
The lease is a declining asset, and so the shorter it gets, typically of course the more it costs to extend it. And ultimately, when they see their local value, they're in a far better position, perhaps with just a back of the envelope calculation, to know whether or not this is a legitimate price based on their particular circumstances, or indeed it's something that is not as fair as it could be.
So for those in situations like Brian, the advice is don't pay up, at least not until you've done your research and negotiated what you think is a fair price. Phil Lavelle, BBC News.
Well, Tony Essien, who's the Chief Executive of the Leasehold Advisory Service, you saw him in that report, is here now. It's a little confusing, this business, isn't it? But in some ways, there is a pattern, there is a procedure in place, which must be a reassurance to people if they have a problem.
I'd certainly like to think so. I mean, there are two ways of getting your lease extended. You can do it by negotiation, and hopefully parties will arrive at a fair price. But if that's not possible, there is a statutory scheme in the 1993 Leasehold Reform Act, whereby if you've owned the property for 2 years, you can A, compel its extension, and B, have the price determined independently.
But do you have to do that by legal means? Because obviously that puts a lot of people off because it's so costly.
It can do, of course, but you have to look at the end result. The end result is getting your lease extended, having a fair price determined at the end of the day. The alternative is just going back and forth with the landlord, potentially without any particular stop date in mind. So people have to decide, get informed, and make a good decision.
I'm trying to think of the possible things that go wrong here. One, for example, is that some people don't know who their landlord is. I mean, you know, that people disappear, don't they? We were just saying a moment ago, that could be a potential problem, is you want to negotiate, who with?
Indeed. There are ways of finding out who your landlord is. Most properties registered now, and you can do that. But if your landlord, in terms of being around for the purposes of exercising rights or even discussion about a lease extension, the Act of Parliament does allow you to serve, apply to court in his absence and pursue it that way and still have a tribunal determine the price independently and get your lease extended.
Can some people use it to their advantage? Because sometimes you'll see a flat that's advertised in a beautiful area and you think, wow, I can afford that. And actually then you look at the lease and it might be 25 years. But actually, might it work to some people's advantage that they can then just have it extended for what might seem a very reasonable price?
Well, if you go through the statutory procedure, it's a fixed length of time, which is 90 years. So if you get a valuer to do the number crunching for you, it may work out the right way for you. If, on the other hand, you want to get it just enough for you to get a yield or a return on what you're investing, then that's probably a matter of negotiation. Again, having been informed, A, by the Leasehold Advisory Service, or B, from a local valuer to give you the information you need to make, again, good decisions.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
thank you very much.